Chapter 19. May 8th. 3:15 a.m. Arabian Standard Time. 2:15 a.m. Central European Summer Time. 8:15 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, May 7th. Al-Fallujah, 45 miles west of Baghdad, Iraq. The street where they met was wrecked. The Americans had taken the city in brutal house-to-house fighting 6 months before. All this time later, nothing had been rebuilt. Buildings were mere rubble, or were pockmarked with bullet holes. Scrap metal littered the streets and alleyways. Fresh water was brought in on trucks. The sewage system was destroyed. Half the city still had no electricity. The locals called it punishment. The Americans called it justice. The man called himself Abu the Martyr. He was 43 years old, and long ago had started turning gray. His beard was shot through with gray and white. His vision, once so acute, was beginning to fail. When reading the Holy Quran in the evenings, he was forced to hold it as far from his face as his arms would allow. Soon someone would have to hold it up for him from across the room. He had been trying to martyr himself for more than 20 years. He was willing, but Allah had chosen not to take him. "His will, not mine, be done," the martyr whispered. He quietly smoked a cigarette and stood in the doorway of an abandoned building. The front facade of the building was intact. The rear of the building was open air and a pile of shattered bricks. A missile or rocket had hit this place, a very typical residential building in what had once been a poor, crowded, but very typical residential neighborhood. Up the street, a car appeared, its headlights off. It rolled slowly through the ripped-up asphalt that littered the road. It descended into a shallow missile crater, then came up the other side. Now the martyr could see it more clearly. An old, black, armored Mercedes. Windows smoked, metal rutted and pitted and banged in from use in a war zone. The man was here, just as he announced he would be. How he managed to cross back and forth through the American military checkpoints was a mystery. The answer known only to him. How he managed to openly cross territory held by Sunni militias was not a mystery. The man was an untouchable. The car pulled up to the doorway. The window powered down. The man was white, with sandy blonde hair and an English accent. He was a little overweight, but not sloppy. The extra weight he carried probably came from his love affair with drink, not with food, and certainly not with sedentary behavior. He was a man frequently on the move. Rumor had it that he was a British spy. What else could he be? He had access to intelligence that no one else seemed to have. His blue eyes were piercing, even in the dark of night. The martyr didn't move from the doorway, not right away. Instead, he scanned up and down the street. It was always possible that the Brit had been followed. More than possible, it was probably guaranteed. The man stuck out in these parts like a green plant on the surface of the moon. "God is great, eh?" the martyr said. Indeed, the news of the kidnapping was now circling the entire world. It was a giant blow to the great Satan, one that would give hope to people of faith everywhere. "Not my God," the man said in his cultured English accent. "And anyway, I suppose I wouldn't celebrate too soon, if I were you." The martyr nearly smiled. "No? Why not? The deed is done." The Brit scanned the roadway ahead for a moment. "There could be a problem," he said. "Oh?" the martyr said. "What problem is that?" "Do you have the money?" the Brit said. "Of course." "Then give it to me, and I will describe the problem to you." The martyr leaned back into the dark shadows of the doorway. Tucked just down the hall, inside an alcove, was a leather satchel. The bag contained untraceable cash in various denominations, and 3 different currencies: American dollars, euros, and British pounds. The money was worth roughly $500,000, all told. The man was expensive, but over time he had proven to be well worth the high price. The martyr darted across open space, carrying the bag between the doorway and the car. He didn't enjoy being exposed on the street like this. "The back door is open," the Brit said. "Put the bag on the floor." The martyr opened the back door and slid the bag onto the floor behind the driver's side. He slammed the car door and returned to the shelter of his doorway. "Don't you want to count it?" The Brit shook his head. "No. I trust you. How can men work together without a little bit of trust?" "Also, you will have me killed if the money is wrong," the martyr said. The Brit nodded. "Yes." "So, what's the problem, then?" "A small group of American operatives is on a trail that is warm, and may soon grow warmer. A Sunni tribal elder from outside Tikrit has been quite forthcoming with information, I'm afraid." "That camp that was raided?" The Brit nodded again. "Yes. The name of the elder?" There was a long pause while the Brit sat quietly. He was hesitant, of course, because the brothers would show no mercy to this so-called elder, and they would seek to erase any information the elder might have shared with others, including his family and clan. "It is no help unless we have the name," the martyr said. "Imam Muhammad al-Barak," the Brit said. "God have mercy on him." "Thank you, Mr. Montgomery," the martyr said. The Brit looked at him, his eyes harder than ever. There was something in those eyes that gave the martyr pause. It was a coldness, as though the Brit could kill the martyr slowly and without emotion. It was a coldness like the cold of deep space. Or perhaps it was just an emptiness. Perhaps it was more that something was missing than that something was there. But within seconds the martyr had recovered himself. "Oh, yes," he said. "I know more than I seem to." The Brit's cold gaze never wavered. "There are things in this world that you're better off not knowing. If I were you, I'd forget some of the things that you think you know. In fact, I'd start working on that project right now." The window powered up, and the car slowly pulled away. The martyr took a long, shaky drag on his cigarette. The Brit didn't frighten him. No man did. He had given himself to Allah more than 20 years ago. He was trying to martyr himself, and Allah just hadn't claimed him yet. It was good to remind himself of that from time to time. "Your God may have mercy on al-Barak," he said to no one, "but we won't." Chapter 20. May 7th. 10:05 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. 4:05 a.m. Central European Summer Time, May 8th. The Situation Room, the White House, Washington, D.C. His worst nightmare had come true. David Barrett, President of the United States, strode the halls of the West Wing toward the elevator that would take him down to the Situation Room. A phalanx of people strode with him, ahead of him, behind him, all around him. Aides, interns, Secret Service men, staff of various kinds. He had no idea who half these people were. Everyone was much shorter than he was. Many were a head shorter or more. His chief of staff, Lawrence Keller, walked by his side. He looked down at Keller. He was a short, slim man, nearly totally bald. David knew that Lawrence was a long-distance runner. He was late 50s, divorced, had a couple of kids. He had been around Washington forever, and was a consummate political player. He was the proverbial hot knife cutting through butter. Lawrence Keller was the only comforting fact of this entire disaster. There was someone nearby whom David Barrett could trust. Everyone was talking at once. "The Turkish Prime Minister sends his deepest condolences," and wants you to know that if any Turkish national was involved in this crime, the penalty will be death. French commandos are on standby, awaiting our orders. The entire country is on lockdown. House-to-house searches have begun in Geneva, Zurich, and Bern, as well as smaller Swiss cities and towns. House-to-house searches had begun? What in God's name had taken them so long? He realized he must be in shock. The voices around him were becoming an increasingly strange babel, impossible to understand. Bits and pieces of nonsensical information flowed past him. The British Prime Minister has gone on TV to say China has offered the use of spy satellites and surveillance. Vladimir Putin is being briefed as we CIA, NSA, and all intelligence listening stations. Shut up! He shouted before he knew he was going to. Everyone just shut up and stop talking. I can't stand it anymore. He turned to Lawrence Keller. Lawrence, who is going to be briefing us now? General Richard Stark, from the Pentagon, Keller said. I'm told he has up-to-the-minute information, and all intelligence is being fed to and vetted through his office. Barrett nodded. I need you, Lawrence. I'm lost right now. I need you to stay on these people. I need this to happen at twice the speed it's happening right now. I need to hammer every target on Earth. I don't care what needs to be done, or whose toes are stepped on, or frankly, who gets killed. I don't care if entire countries become parking lots. I want my daughter back. Keller nodded. I am going to move heaven and earth for you, David. This is my promise. Thank you. The entire phalanx of people moved into the elevator. Barrett stood in the middle of the crowd. He closed his eyes. He saw Elizabeth as a small girl at a family barbecue at the old family house in Newport, running to him, the sea in the background. He could see every detail of her, the flowered dress she wore, her floppy green sun hat, her sandals that buckled at the ankle, her blonde hair, her huge smile, one front tooth missing. He didn't know if he was going to scream or pass out. He took a deep breath instead. It would be unseemly to pass out in front of so many strangers. A Barrett did not show weakness. He had gotten off the phone with his father just minutes ago. His father, 89-year-old Sylvester Barrett, had spent his life growing the family oil business that his own father had founded. He was a tough man. Bury them, his father said. Make them pay. Every stinking last one of them. She's my daughter, Dad. That's what he wanted to say. Couldn't he understand that? His daughter had been kidnapped. He loved her so much, it was like a piece of himself had been taken. If he could be taken in her stead, he would do it, in a heartbeat, no hesitation at all. I love her. I am dying inside. But you didn't say things like that to Sylvester Barrett. If anything, the conversation with his wife had gone even worse. She simply wept over the phone line, and he couldn't think of a single thing to say that might comfort her. He stood there with a lump in his throat, his face turning red as the woman he loved began shrieking at him. I'm going to get her back, he croaked before hanging up the phone. It was the only thing he could think of. The elevator opened into the egg-shaped Situation Room. It was super modern, set up for maximum use of the space, with large screens embedded in the walls every couple of feet, and a giant projection screen on the far wall at the end of the table. Except for David's own seat, every plush leather seat at the table was occupied. Overweight men in suits, thin and ramrod-straight military men in uniform. A man in a dress uniform stood at the far head of the table. Richard Stark. David didn't care for Richard Stark, but right now he didn't care much for anyone. Maybe Stark would throw him a lifeline in this desperate moment. Stranger things had happened. He sat down in the chair reserved for the president. The room suddenly went quiet. David knew that he was renowned for his anger and his tirades. Many of his closest aides didn't like him. He knew that about himself, and it was another thing he had never cared about. He was a Barrett, after all. If they all quieted down right now, it was because they were afraid of what he would say if they didn't. A crisis was on, and he was inches from an all-consuming rage. Okay, Richard, he said. Never mind the introductions. Never mind the niceties and the preliminaries. Just tell me some good news. Stark slipped a pair of black reading glasses onto his face. He looked down at the sheets of paper in his hand. "We are developing intelligence along several lines. The roommate, Rita Chadwick, is still in CIA custody and is cooperating. Her family is insisting she be released pending the arrival of a legal team from New York. We told them no. The lead kidnapper has been identified as Ahmet Kaya of Istanbul, 21 years old. It is clear that this is an alias, and we are tracking—" "Richard!" There was not a sound in the room. The President of the United States was beginning to shout. In a moment, he might throw one of his trademark temper tantrums. No, he took a deep breath. He wasn't going to do that. He spoke in an even, level tone. "Tell me what you have," he said, "not what you are developing." Stark nodded. He took his glasses off. He didn't need to look at the papers in his hand. "Okay, David. Your daughter was kidnapped, as you know. Our intelligence suggests that she was taken from Geneva by car, then was loaded onto a boat, which crossed Lake Geneva into France without passing through any border control. We are searching satellite footage to confirm this, though it may be difficult to confirm if the boat was small enough and operated without lights. After the boat landed, we believe she was taken into the French countryside." David suddenly felt very subdued. "And then," he said. General Stark shook his head. "We have no idea." "You don't know where my daughter is?" "I'm going to be honest with you, David. This happened hours ago. It was clearly planned well ahead of time, and they got a sizable head start on us. If they made it into France, and we believe they did, and then reached one of the many small airfields in that region—" President Barrett wanted to cover his ears against the words he knew must come next. "They could have taken her anywhere." Chapter 21. May 8th, 6:35 a.m. Arabian Standard Time, 10:35 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, May 7th. The Embassy of the United States in Iraq, a.k.a. the Republican Palace. The International Zone, a.k.a. the Green Zone. Kark District, Baghdad, Iraq. In the night, he had waited for an attack. He was lying on a cot in a gray Go Army t-shirt and boxers in a sweltering office, surrounded by other people doing more or less the same. No air conditioning. No air at all. He had noise-canceling foam plugs in his ears and a strapped eye shade covering his face. The eye shade was a good one, not too tight, and it left him no peripheral vision at all. He was in a world of total darkness, exactly where he wanted to be. During the early hours, there had been a sudden flurry of movement, people coming and going, people talking in hushed tones. Luke didn't care. He had completed his mission. 2 missions, in fact, and was going home tomorrow. His body was sore, and his brain was tired. He was wrung out. If the embassy was bombed or overrun by suicide fighters, he assumed someone would wake him up to let him know. "Luke! Luke Stone! Wake up!" He took the nightshade off his face, and light flooded in. It was daytime. Trudy Wellington stood over him. Her hair was mussed. She wore a light blue t-shirt and cotton athletic shorts. Her clothes had practically sweated through. She looked like she had just woken up herself. She looked like breakfast. Good thing he had turned down that drink. Luke took his earplugs out and blinked. The cots around him were all empty. "Trudy, good morning." "I've been looking all over for you," she said. "We need to come up with a better system for where our people are sleeping. It's ridiculous to walk all over this palace looking for everybody." It seemed a bit late for coming up with a system. They were on their way out of here. A system for cot assignments was going to be unnecessary at best. Okay, Trudy was a little annoyed. That's all it was. She could design a system on the flight home if she wanted. "Are we leaving now?" Luke said. She shook her head. Her hair bounced with it. "No. We have a meeting. You, me, Ed, Mark Swan, Big Daddy, and Don on the phone. As soon as you can claw your way out of bed." "A meeting? I thought we were done. We're going home today." Her big eyes blinked at him. She stared at him quizzically. "You haven't heard?" He shook his head. "Heard what?" "No, I guess I haven't." "We're not going home." "I'm going home," Luke said. "I have a baby on the way. You guys can stay here if you want." He looked around at all the wooden fold-up cots in the barren room with bare plywood walls. "I mean, it's nice here, so I don't blame you for wanting to stay, but—" "Luke," she said, her voice suddenly stern, "no one is leaving. All military and intelligence assets are ordered to stay in place and on call until further notice." "Why? Are we at war?" Luke said, realizing instantly how silly the question sounded. Were they at war? Yes, obviously they were at war. What he meant was— "There's a problem," Trudy said, "and we've got a meeting right now, as soon as you're ready." The young girl wore a bright orange jumpsuit. She kneeled at the front of the jittery video, her hands behind her back, probably bound. Her hair was tied back under a simple black headscarf. Behind her, 5 men stood, all of them wearing black masks across their faces. They were dressed in the manner of a guerrilla army, with heavy ballistic vests, ammo belts across their chests, many-pocketed cargo pants, and combat boots. 4 of the men carried AK-47 rifles. They stood in front of a black banner with white lettering in Arabic. The 5th, a man wearing the black hood of an executioner, carried a long, heavy knife, like a machete. He held it aloft, and at times gestured with it. The imagery made Luke sick. Sick with anger, with rage, with a helpless feeling. Inside of him, there was an animal trapped in a cage, a brute wanting very badly to kick its way out. If it got out, God help every man in that video and anyone who worked with them or aided them in any way. God help entire regions and an entire religion. He glanced at Ed Newsom. The man's huge right fist was clenched. His jaw was set. He stood by the table in what could be mistaken for a relaxed posture, except his entire body was alive with electricity. Luke took a deep breath. "My father is an imperialist and a crusader," the girl was saying. Her eyes darted, looking at something off-screen. Clearly it was the script she was being forced to read. He is a nitwit and a dupe of the Western ruling classes who use and degrade women and who deliberately corrupt the morals of the youth in the entire world. They are in league with Satan, and my father—" Here she turned her head and began to cry. Within seconds she was weeping abjectly, utterly unable to continue. The video jumped and cut. Now she was facing forward again. "They cut it to give her time to compose herself," Mark Swan said. "And my father is their willing servant," the girl said. "He is a coward and a running dog who has used the might of the West to make war on Allah's faithful people. Even while in his youth, he used his wealth to escape his own military responsibilities and his country's dirty wars." "Jesus," Luke said. "Do not cry for me," she said now. "I am young, but was not naive. I willfully ignored the suffering my father and his ilk have inflicted on masses of the faithful throughout the world. I am the spawn of evil, and I am not—" She began to cry again. "I am not innocent." She lost it again. She could not speak. She kneeled there, head hanging, face obscured, her entire body shaking with sobs. The screen jumped again, revealing yet another artless cut. She was kneeling up straight again. She was no longer crying. "My capture and punishment is a glory to the Prophet,
and confirmation to Allah's people that their faith is rewarded. I go to my...
She stopped and took a deep breath.
I go to my death, knowing that I am as guilty of these terrible crimes as any crusader in Iraq, Afghanistan, Africa, or the Holy Land. May the people rejoice at this act of justice, and in time may Allah bring an even greater reckoning upon my father, my family, and my people.
The video jumped again. The girl was still on her knees, but now she was blindfolded. The man in the hood moved to front and center. He jabbed his knife at the screen, and his mouth moved, while clanging music played over him. He pulled up his right sleeve and showed the camera a tattoo on his shoulder. It was a black tattoo of a crescent moon and a star, a symbol of the former Ottoman Empire, and by extension, the Islamic world. Arabic lettering appeared on the screen, superimposed over him as he spoke. Then he and all the other men were gone. It was just the girl now, kneeling, blindfolded, head down, the sign in Arabic still hanging behind her. The video ended. For a few seconds, no one spoke. "I'm going to kill that guy," Ed Newsom said. "I don't mean I want to. I mean I'm going to. Don't matter how long it takes. Don't matter where he is. Don't matter who else is there."
"What does the banner in the back say?" Luke said. "It says, Jamaat al-Tawhid wal-Jihad," Trudy said. "In English, that means the Organization of God's Oneness in Holy War. It is a group founded by Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, and it's pledged its allegiance to Al-Qaeda."
"Great," Luke said. "And what was all that wording at the end?"
Trudy shrugged. "That was a demand. They have a laundry list of individuals they want released from prison. The list is comprehensive, to say the least, and it makes it hard to get a sense of who was behind the abduction. It includes Palestinians held in Israeli prisons, numerous individuals held at Guantanamo Bay, and at alleged black sites in Afghanistan and other countries. We don't have confirmation yet from the Pentagon or the CIA that some of these individuals are being held, or that they even exist. There are also terrorist leaders being held in Pakistan, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Thailand, not to mention Russia, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, as well as right here in Iraq."
"How many people in all?" Luke said. Trudy glanced down at some paperwork in front of her.
248, all men, thought to be held in 12 different countries.
"And if they're not released?" Luke said, though he imagined he knew the answer.
"The first 30 prisoners must be released by tomorrow morning," Trudy said, as an indication of goodwill and acceptance of the terms. "No preparation, simply open the gates and let them walk free." And they're right, in certain places this could be done. After that, at least another 10 must be released or transferred to their home country every day, until they're all set free. The whole operation can take up to 3 weeks.
"And if it doesn't happen?"
"If the first 30 prisoners aren't released by 9 a.m. tomorrow, Baghdad time, then Elizabeth Barrett will be beheaded, and the video will be released on internet outlets and to news stations. If there is any stumble in the schedule after that, then the same thing will happen. Most outlets won't show the video, but of course, within a short time, a few will. Then it will be copied, and then it will be everywhere."
"So?" Trudy nodded.
"Yeah. 26 hours from now, more or less, the president's daughter will be dead, and the ultimate jihadi recruiting video will be released worldwide."
"Trudy, give us your impressions," Don's voice said. They sat around the makeshift conference table, a slab of plywood balanced on 2 sawhorses. Don's voice came from the black octopus at the center. Trudy, Swan, Ed Newsom, and Luke formed a rough square. Big Daddy Cronin and the British spy Montgomery stood at the edges of the rounded stone room. Luke could hardly imagine why they were here. There must be 1,000 other intelligence teams out there who were closer to the action.
Well, Elizabeth Barrett is a kid, Trudy said, starting with something that couldn't be more obvious. To some extent, because of her position, she's going to be more sheltered than the average 18-year-old. From what we have, her friend, the young woman from the Chadwick family, hooked her up on a blind date of sorts and taught her how to sneak away from her security detail. But the Chadwick girl was not, as far as we know, complicit in the kidnapping. It was a lark to her, a harmless escapade.
Okay, Don's disembodied voice said. It seemed to Luke that Trudy was just speaking to get the feel for talking, that she was warming up to the real meat of this, like she was priming the pump to get the water flowing. Trudy went on.
The Turk, however, was not on a lark. Ahmet Kaya, his alias, is a person who does not exist. At this time, we have no idea if he really is a Turk. We do know that he spoke Turkish fluently, as a native speaker would speak it, or close enough that outsiders would think so. We also know he spoke English and French, both at a conversational level. So he has, or had, a lot of high-level language skills.
Had? Luke said. Trudy nodded.
There's a good chance that Ahmet is now dead. He was planted in Geneva, close to the president's daughter, for at least the past year. He was put there to carry out a task, and once he carried it out successfully, he instantly became a liability. Unless he has another skill set we're not aware of, or he's a leader in the Islamic world, then to keep him alive is to take a risk. Half the intelligence assets on Earth are looking for him at this moment.
Okay, Luke said.
But let's get back to the language skills, Trudy said. Excellent language skills, a good-looking kid who, according to all accounts, is a sharp dresser. What does this suggest to you?
I don't know, Ed Newsom said. The camp?
Could be, Trudy said. The camp you raided, or one very much like it. It's a long shot for sure, but it's all we've got. There was ample security footage of Ahmet entering the club, inside the club, and in the alleyway outside the club. There's security footage of him wandering around Geneva and the surrounding area for an entire year. It would make sense to match those images with the images that were taken from the camp and see if anything comes up.
Big Daddy cleared his throat. Of course, Big Daddy Cronin didn't just hang around meetings. Hi, Bill, Luke said, without turning around. Hi, everybody, Big Daddy said. Thanks for inviting Monty and I to your little meeting. Of course, we've already run the footage of Ahmet against images of students at the camp. What did you get, Bill? Don said. We got 14 possible matches. 7 of those 14 are better than the others. None are perfect.
You have to consider that the man named Ahmet may have had cosmetic surgery, Trudy said.
Big Daddy nodded. We have, but we've hit a dead end. The individuals in those photos are identified by codes, series of letters and numbers, not names. Did you pass this intel up the line? Don said. Big Daddy didn't answer the question. Bill? I think you know the answer to that, Don. Bill? I don't think this is the time to withhold information so you can build your little intelligence fiefdom. There are bigger issues at play here. Don, I'm not building a fiefdom. I'm about getting results. Too many times I've passed hard-won intel up the line. Intel people have died for, only to see it get lost, stepped on, or squashed because it's politically inconvenient. That camp was given to us by a Sunni tribal elder, in confidence and under pain of his own death. He's a source, and I'm protecting him. We pass this stuff up the line, and I guarantee you he's exposed inside of 24 hours. I don't do that. Not here. Whisper the wrong word to the wrong person, and entire groups of people get snuffed. Big Daddy let that linger in the room. He was a strange and mercurial man. He was sitting on intelligence that might or might not save the president's daughter. He was not going to release it because he was protecting some Sunni tribespeople. We don't even know if what we have is relevant at all. Yes, the people holding Elizabeth Barrett claim to be aligned with Zarqawi's group, but putting a banner on the wall doesn't really mean anything. We have no identifying features in this video. No voices outside of Elizabeth's. No identifiable landscape features, or even internal architectural style. No faces of the terrorist. We have a tattoo, but nothing else. Any one of 100 terrorist leaders and splinter groups could have taken that child. There was absolutely no reason to believe that we have an inside track on this. We could get people killed for a lead that's a dead end.
If there's no reason to believe, then why even do it? Mark Swan said.
Big Daddy shrugged. We have to do something. We can't just sit here. There are 1 million investigations going on, and most of them are higher priority than this. But the vast majority of them will not bear fruit. This one also probably won't. But if we don't try, and the president's girl gets killed, I'm going to have a hard time living with that.
What do you suggest? Don said.
I suggest we poke at it. Probe around a little. You know my motto. Grab a loose end and pull. Let's see if we really have anything. We move fast, and it's secret. If we do have something, then we pass it on, but only then.
Monty?
Don said. Montgomery shrugged. He was wearing a dress shirt that was soaked through with sweat. He looked ruffled, like he had slept in it. He was a very rumpled man. Even his face looked like it had come through some sort of clothing wringer. He was drinking coffee and smoking a cigarette.
I have access to a squad of blokes from the Special Air Service. If your lads and mine were all willing to go back out, I'd say we go and see our tribal elder, Muhammad al-Barak, at his family compound outside Tikrit. He brought that cap to our attention, which, to me, means he knows more than he's been willing to say. My feeling is he will be willing to cooperate, if it means he might save Elizabeth. Naturally, he would expect something in return.
Naturally, Luke said. Monty went on.
We need to make a show of arresting him and his people, and then disappear them, so to speak. We get a name from him, someone who knows more, and who we can apply some pressure upon. Then we move up the line and acquire that person. We bring that person back here, not here to the embassy, mind you, but somewhere nearby, and we have a little chat to them. A rather expedient chat, I imagine. There won't be much time for talking around in circles, if you see my point. We get a name or a place from that person. We keep doing that until we develop a real lead. It's a bit tedious, but I don't see any other options.
And the elder? Don said. Al-Barak? What happens to him?
He's gone, Montgomery said. For their own protection, we take him and his entire group and fast-track their immigration to Britain or America. Overnight them, if you see my meaning.
I do see it, Don said. Luke? Luke stared at the octopus. He thought of Becca at home, 9 months pregnant. He had already told her he was leaving today. Don, Becca is going to give birth any minute. I know that. I need to get out of here. Can we go see the elder today?
My men can go as soon as you're ready, Montgomery said. They've been awake since 4 a.m.
If we do it, can you put me on a plane today? Luke said. Pretend I'm a journalist. Give me a hardship pass, anything? There was a pause over the line.
Don?
Yes. Go bring in the elder, and I will bring you home. There was quiet for another moment. Ed? Don said. How do you feel about this mission? Ed shrugged. I got a date with the man in that video. Other than that, I got nowhere to be. A squeal of static came over Don's line. Bill, do you have anything more to say about this? Bill nodded. Yes. I would caution everyone in this room that, given the current circumstances and the danger to the people involved, the mission we've discussed here does not exist, and it will never exist. Chapter 22, May 8th, 12:20 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, 7:20 a.m. Arabian Standard Time. The Oval Office, the White House, Washington, D.C. David, I think you should go to bed. David Barrett, the President of the United States, sat at the Resolute desk. Although he was quite tall, well-built, and very nearly movie star handsome, somehow he looked like a small child behind there. I want to kill them all, he said. I know that, his chief of staff, Lawrence Keller, said. Keller sat across from him, watching his boss carefully, analyzing him, assessing him. The desk, which had been a gift from the British people, was too big for David. Not physically, no. But Franklin Delano Roosevelt had sat at that desk when dealing with the fallout from the Great Depression, the Pearl Harbor attack, the darkest days of World War II. John F. Kennedy had sat at that desk during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and also during the Bay of Pigs fiasco. Ronald Reagan had sat at that desk during the nuclear face-offs with the Russians of the 1980s. David Barrett was too small for the desk. He was too small for the job. He was too small for the moment. Keller had always known this about him. Their relationship was a marriage of convenience. David had stumbled into the presidency through a confluence of family connections, money, good looks and grooming, and some rather glaring misplays committed by the opposing party. Their own party had installed Keller as David's chief of staff, with the hope that Keller could guide the man through the minefield of his own lazy mind and awful instincts. It's a crisis, Lawrence, Barrett said. He held his head in his hands, propped up in his elbows. His dress shirt was rolled back to his forearms. Until a few moments ago, he had been crying for a little while. Keller nodded. Yes, it is. And we're doing everything we can to manage it and see it through to a positive conclusion. Barrett looked up. His eyes were red. They're killing me. Do you know that? The press. They are killing me. My daughter is gone. The terrorists have paraded her on TV like a captured animal, making her say terrible, hateful things about me. They're going to kill her. I know that. You know that. If they've... He shook his head, unable to speak for a moment. If they have hurt her in any way, I don't know what I'm going to do. Keller was calm. Sir, David, you can rest assured that when this crisis is over, there is going to be hell to pay. I am already in touch with every single decision-maker who matters in the Pentagon, with the CIA, with the NSA, and a host of other organizations who safeguard our security. You do not have to worry about taking your revenge. I am going to take it. Barrett nodded and began to cry again. I know. You're a good man. I trust you. If they hurt her, I want the entire world set on fire. And it will be, Keller said. Barrett gritted his teeth. And this media. My God, Lawrence. Can't we stop them? My daughter, my beautiful daughter is under threat of death, and all these bastards can focus on is my military record. They're making me into a damn laughingstock. I hate them so much. I would bomb them too. Keller shook his head. There was nothing anyone could do about the media or about David Barrett's military record. The man found it convenient to take 5 straight draft deferments during the height of the Vietnam War. At one point, during a period when his draft status was unresolved, meaning the Army felt he should report for duty, and his father and grandfather were frantically pulling strings to make the Army change its mind, David had spent 4 months in the French Riviera. Keller himself felt no sympathy about this, or about the skewering a few of the newspapers were giving him. Keller had done 2 tours of Vietnam as a United States Marine, had been wounded on 3 occasions, and had seen many, many people die. He had fought street to street during the Battle of Hue. Afterward, his reward, his downtime as it were, was to spend a year patrolling the DMZ between North and South Korea. No, he didn't feel much sympathy for David and his military record. The loss of his daughter was profound and terrible. Keller would resolve that if he could. But David being teased by a handful of resentful reporters? So be it. David, you should go upstairs to bed, okay? The things they're saying about me, Lawrence, it isn't fair. David, Keller said, sternly now, as your friend, not as your chief of staff. I'm telling you, I'm commanding you, okay? Go to bed. Yes, Elizabeth has been taken. Yes, it is terrible, terrible news. But thousands of people are working around the clock, the best people on earth, to save her life. Meanwhile, Caitlin hasn't been taken, and she's still with you. And Marilyn is up there in bed, crying herself to sleep over the loss of her daughter. Be a man. Be her husband. Be strong for her. Go upstairs and comfort her, and tell her that everything is going to be all right. Barrett was shaking his head. But what if it's not going to be all right? Keller shrugged. If that's what you believe, then lie to her. Barrett stared at him. That's right, Keller said. It's a time for comforting lies. Finally, Barrett nodded his head. Okay, I can do that. I lie all the time. I have to. It's part of the job. Keller nodded, but didn't answer directly. Do it for her, he said. Make her know that you're going to be a man for her. Try to get some sleep. And in the morning, I promise, this isn't going to look nearly as dark as it does right now. I can take a pill, Barrett said. I can sleep some. Keller nodded again. He stood, and now Barrett stood as well. Barrett was much taller than Keller. The two men shook hands. Promise me you'll go right now, Keller said. I can see myself out. Barrett nodded. I will. I promise. And thank you, Lawrence. You're my rock. I don't know how I would ever get through any of this without you. It's my honor to serve this office, Keller said. It was just after 1 a.m. Lawrence Keller sat in his car, a black BMW 325i sedan, which he had bought new last year. It was a nice car, and he was proud of it. He was proud of what it said about him as well. A lot of people with high-level Washington jobs, and Keller had one of the highest of the high-level jobs, were driven everywhere. But not Lawrence Keller. He wouldn't hear of it, partly because he was self-reliant to an extreme, and partly because drivers witnessed things. They saw things, and they overheard things. Washington, D.C. was not a town where you wanted people to know what you were up to. The more people who knew, the more people who could, and almost certainly would, if the price was right, take you down. Keller was parked in the south end of Georgetown. Now and then, a car rolled slowly past in the quiet streets. Keller liked Georgetown. Disasters came and went. Scandals came and went. Famous men and women sparked through the sky like Roman candles and then flamed out. Entire governments ruled the city and the country for years, only to see everything they worked for undone by the next group in power. All of that happened, yes. But Georgetown was eternal. In his hand, Keller held a small Radio Shack digital recorder. He had been listening to the playback for the past 20 minutes or so, fast-forwarding and rewinding to certain parts he wanted to hear again and again. He listened to the President of the United States abjectly weeping in the Oval Office. He listened to the President speaking certain lines that were gold. I want to kill them all. Keller had marked the spots that he liked best. He could go straight to them with just the press of a button. He went to another one now. They're killing me. Do you know that? The press. They are killing me. And then another. All these bastards can focus on is my military record. They're making me into a damn laughingstock. I hate them so much. I would bomb them too. Those ones were all good. Together, they painted a picture of a small-minded man who was coming apart at the seams. Here was a person in command of the greatest armed forces the world had ever seen, with his finger on the nuclear button, who was sitting in the Oval Office, crying, and who was expressing an urge to kill many people. He was also almost laughably self-absorbed during a major crisis, worrying about his reputation and the things the press were saying about him. And the self-incriminating things he said only got worse. The hole he dug only got deeper. For example, there was this. If they have hurt her in any way, I don't know what I'm going to do. If they hurt her, I want the entire world set on fire. Keller nodded and smiled. David Barrett sounded unhinged. A man going through a personal tragedy who was rapidly becoming a threat to everyone on Earth. Plus there was this. I lie all the time. I have to. It's part of the job. The man seemed to believe that part of his job was to lie. Of course, this was true, but it wasn't something the American people would like to hear. And then there was this, a small, subtle statement that was perhaps the most damning thing of all. I can take a pill. I can sleep some. The president, who was weeping, raging about the media, and threatening to set the world on fire, something that was well within his power to do, was also dependent on medication to sleep. Lawrence Keller took a deep breath. It was amazing. He and his allies had wanted David out of office from almost the time the tall dope had wandered into it. He was a weak, uncertain president. He was swayed by random conversations. Keller often met with him in the morning, got his stance on a particular issue, and couldn't be sure that it would still be the same by that afternoon. It would be good to get David out of there. It would be good to replace him with someone stronger, someone like his current vice president, Mark Baylor, for example. It would be good for the country. And it would also be good for Lawrence Keller, wouldn't it? Yes, it would. Being chief of staff to a weak president was a good job. Many people would kill for such a job. But it wasn't the best of all possible jobs, was it? No, it wasn't. What was a better job? Chief of staff under a strong president, certainly. But also Secretary of State, let's say. Or Director of National Security. People made jumps like that sometimes. Lawrence Keller was the type of man who could make a jump like that. Admittedly, it was an unfortunate set of circumstances that were removing David from office. Keller would never wish anything like this on Elizabeth Barrett. He had met her several times and thought her a fine young person. Attractive, but probably not beautiful. Smart enough, but certainly not a genius. Just a nice girl from a very rich family whose dad happened to be the president. Elizabeth had done a very silly thing, and the Secret Service had probably been lax in their protection of her. They had relied too much on the school's security, and they had underestimated what a bored teenage girl might do to experience a little excitement and a little romance. Keller hoped that they were able to retrieve Elizabeth safe and sound. But her antics had caused something of a disaster, which, by the way, was likely to set off a chain of catastrophic violence that would impact thousands of innocent people, people whom irresponsible young Elizabeth would never meet or even imagine. And her antics had opened an opportunity to remove from the highest office in the land a man who was unfit to occupy that office. In the end, this was a good thing, no matter what happened to Elizabeth. It was not an opportunity that should be allowed to go to waste. Okay, that settled it. Keller climbed out of the car and set out walking at a brisk pace. Within a few moments, he was at the bottom of the hill and crossing the Francis Scott Key Bridge along the pedestrian sidewalk, heading across the Potomac River toward the Arlington neighborhood of Roslyn. On the bridge, the 6 lanes were quiet. Now and then, a car passed. Up ahead, to his south, the tall office towers of Roslyn loomed. Even this time of night, there were many, many lights on. Halfway across the bridge, Keller stopped. He pulled out a small cellular telephone and flipped it open. It was a burner phone. He had purchased it anonymously for cash with prepaid minutes loaded on it. It was breezy out here on the bridge. Someone with a camera and a high-powered telephoto lens could watch him, but it would be very hard for anyone to overhear him speaking. It would also be hard to intercept a phone call that no one was expecting from a phone that had never been used before. And naturally, it would be impossible to trace from where the call had come. He dialed a number, one that very few people had. After a couple of rings, a voice picked up. "Hello?" "Hi," Keller said. "Do you know who this is?" "Of course," the voice said. "I was staying up watching the TV news and waiting for your call. I was beginning to think it wasn't going to come." Keller shook his head and smiled. "Here it is." "Good. What do you have?" "I've got everything we need. It's all on tape. He's cracked. This has broken him." "Okay," the voice said. "You know what to do with it." Keller nodded. "Right. But none of this comes back to me. Agreed?" "Agreed. We'll have someone play the salient parts for him, but he'll think he was bugged. You'll have nothing to do with it." "Good," Keller said. "I suggest you have someone play it for him after he's gotten some sleep, when he's a little more lucid. When I left him, he was barely making sense anymore." "Very nice," the voice said. Keller smiled. "Yes, it is." After they hung up, Keller dropped the telephone on the ground. He stomped on it 3, 4, 5 times until it broke apart. He picked up the shattered plastic casing and tossed it over the protective fence and into the river. Then he did the same with the metallic interior, where the sensitive data might be. He watched the silver metal hit the dark water and then disappear beneath it. Then he kicked apart the last bits and pieces of black plastic still on the sidewalk. The phone was gone. The conversation had never happened. And pretty soon, maybe as soon as later this morning, David Barrett would relinquish his duties as president. Chapter 23. 9:25 a.m. Arabian Standard Time, 1:25 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, Al-Alam, near Tikrit, Iraq. "There's the river," one of the young British soldiers said. To Luke's ears, it sounded like "there's the river." 4 Black Hawk helicopters moved across the pale desert landscape toward an undulating line of green. The green marked a fertile area on either side of the Tigris River. In some places, it was a narrow band. In others, it seemed a mile wide. It snaked on into the far distance. Luke, Ed, and 4 guys from the British Special Air Service, or SAS, rode in the lead chopper. In the second chopper, there were another 6 of the Brits. 12 men in all were on this mission. The Brits all wore black balaclavas across their faces and goggles on their eyes. It was hard to see who they were. The 2 last choppers were empty. They were meant to carry the arrestees. It seemed like it might be a little bit of overkill to take 1 man and his family into custody. In the near distance, oily black smoke rose into the air. A narrow strip of road seemed to lead directly to where the smoke was coming from. "Something's going on," Ed Newsom said. He was right. As the chopper moved closer, Luke could see that red and orange flames were still burning, apparently out of control. The flames reached into the sky in several places. "Attention," the chopper pilot said. "Estimated time of arrival to the target is 1 minute. Prepare for disembark." "Oh, great," Luke said. "The compound is on fire." "Looks like somebody got here first," Ed said. The first 2 choppers touched down on the far edge of the compound, away from the river. The rotor blades kicked up minor dust storms. Luke, Ed, and the SAS clambered out. They walked toward the center of the compound, rifles drawn. Behind them, the helicopters pulled away. The scene was apocalyptic. The main house, a sprawling 20-room monstrosity, and 2 smaller outbuildings were burning. A cluster of large trees planted near the river were on fire, their flaming arms reaching toward heaven. A tall, corrugated building, which must have been a garage — there were several cars parked outside of it — was also on fire. That's where the dark black smoke was coming from. To the far right, the fields were on fire. The buildings and the trees could have been hit with mortars, but the fields must have been deliberately set, possibly with flamethrowers. Near the gate to the road, a couple of large horses, brown and white Arabian chargers, stood together. They stamped their feet, and their tails swung anxiously. At least the horses had been spared. About 100 chickens ran back and forth on the grounds. The sky above the compound was turning dark with circling vultures and birds of prey. Every few moments, a hawk would drop to earth, snatch a frantic chicken, and fly off with it. Straight ahead, the corpse of a woman lay on the ground in a pool of blood, her white robes stained red. Several more human bodies were scattered around, apparently shot while they ran. A water tower had crashed over sideways, its tank ruptured. A grain storehouse had been left intact. Also, a long chicken house was still standing, along with a barn. Luke glanced inside the barn. A few cattle lay on their sides, shot dead. Whoever liked horses didn't feel the same way about cows. "Someone is a step ahead of us," Ed Newsom said. Luke caught a flash of movement out of the corner of his left eye. He turned that way, MP5 already raised. He wasn't the only one. 2 of the SAS guys had done the same. At high speed, Luke replayed the moment in his mind. Someone in dark clothes and with dark hair had just dashed inside the chicken coop. He and the men were moving quickly toward the long building, guns out. They burst inside. It was dim inside the building, and motes of thick dust and feathers hung in the air. Weak light streamed down from high, narrow windows at the top of the building. Someone or something slid through a hole in the ground just as they came in. Small hands came up and slid a wooden board over the hole. The board was a cutout of the wooden floor in an area where chickens would normally be fed their grain. Scattered piles of grain still lay on the floor. When the board was back in place, it was hard to see where the hole had just been. Luke, Ed, and 2 SAS men moved to the spot. Ed reached down, pulled up the board, and darted backward with it. The SAS guy stepped up, rifles trained down the hole, laser sights on, headlamps shining brightly. Luke stepped up with them, hands raised. "Wait!" he shouted. "Steady! Steady!" In the darkness down to the bottom of the hole, 2 small children, a boy and a girl, were crouched, huddled together. "Don't shoot!" "What is he saying?" Luke said. A young SAS guy was translating the boy's Arabic. The SAS guy had removed his balaclava, helmet, and goggles, revealing a fresh-faced, blonde-haired kid with pale blue eyes and fat cheeks. Hardly the fearsome stormtrooper that the helmet and mask made him appear. The boy, perhaps 12 years old, was being strong. The girl, maybe half that age, had given up entirely. She was being held by another SAS guy, with his helmet off, hugging him tightly, pressing her face into his chest. "He says a group of men came just before sunrise. They immediately set about killing everyone. They launched rockets at the houses and shot down anyone who came out. There are more bodies down by the river of people who try to escape by the back way. The elder Imam, Muhammad al-Barak, was taken from the main house, forced to his knees, and shot in the head. The boy and his little sister had been trained to hide beneath the chicken coop if anything like this ever happened, and that's what they did. They made it there without being seen. When they heard the helicopters, he climbed out to see what was happening, and that's when we found him." Luke was relaying the news to Trudy and Swan over a satellite phone. He winced at the news of al-Barak. The old man who had come to thank him and Ed personally had met a bad end. It was the kind of thing that happened all too often around here. "Does he have any idea who the men were?" The SAS guy said something to the kid in Arabic. The kid nodded, his dark eyes hollow and empty. He said something and pointed to the north. He continued speaking for several seconds.
Yes, he knows exactly who they were. They belong to a religious school and jihad training camp about 20 miles north of here, straight along the river. His grandfather, the imam, knew the school and the teachers there well. The boy himself has visited there with family members. His grandfather and father told him it would never be, but he imagined going there to train one day, when he was older. Now he says he would never join them. Their betrayal is too terrible.
"Trudy," Luke said into the telephone. Her voice was there.
Yes?
"We need another quick meeting with Don, Big Daddy, and Monty. I want permission to go in there. We've got a dozen guys, although we're going to send 2 back with the kids. The boy believes the camp the killers came from is just up the river here. If we're going to hit them and get a prisoner who can give us some intel, we should do it before the trail goes cold. I think we can probably do okay with 10 guys.
When do you want to do it?
Trudy said. Luke almost couldn't believe what he was about to say. Don had already given him the green light home. He wanted to go home more than anything. He wanted to see Becca. He wanted to be there when their boy was born. But he also wanted to finish what they had started here. He didn't like that these militia guys had come down and killed Al-Barak and his entire clan. It wasn't right, no matter what Al-Barak had done. If he had a problem with a man, then kill the man, not the family. "Now," Luke said. Green light. 3 Black Hawk helicopters raced across the pale blue morning sky. Big Daddy and Don Morris had been in agreement. Move forward with an assault on the camp. Montgomery had been called away on some other business and had not been available for the meeting. But Luke had kept his SAS guys anyway. Luke had Mark Swan patched through on his helmet radio. Swan had pored over the available satellite imagery and seemed to have pinpointed a militia camp whose location agreed with what the child had described. "What does it look like?" Luke said.
"It looks like a big piece of nothing," Swan said.
"Give me more than that, Swan."
"There is a road,"
Swan said.
"It is marked as Unnamed Road. It hugs the Tigris River for several miles on the west side. Just past a little piece of nothing called Salmon Village, there's a bridge across the Tigris. There's a wide, open, dusty plain, and as near as I can tell, maybe 30 tents. There may be a more permanent structure there, but if there is, I don't see it. It looks like there's an artillery range to the east of there, with some cannons lined up. On the imagery I have, which admittedly is old, there are about a dozen vehicles parked on the property. A few of them appear to be pickup trucks with rear-mounted heavy weapons. If I were you guys, I'd take those things out first, then hit the cannons."
"Can you get me some more recent imagery?" Luke said.
"Not likely. I can't get control of a satellite in the next 10 minutes, and I doubt there's anything better than what I have. No one has ever taken a high-priority look at that place. It really is a slice of nothing in the middle of nowhere. This looks like a very local gang. What I described to you is from me pulling generic imagery in that region, and then zooming in."
"Any place to land?"
"The whole place is flat as a pancake. I'd say land anywhere you like."
Luke shook his head and smiled. "Anything resembling a helipad?"
"No, nothing like that. These people appear to be earthbound. When they go somewhere, they drive there."
"How recent is the imagery you have?"
3 months old."
"Swan!"
"It's all that exists. It's the best you're going to get."
Luke gazed out the bay door for a moment. The choppers were moving fast above the parched, flat landscape. They were about to assault a militia compound, but had no idea what it was going to look like. "Ed? Are you hearing this?" Ed was flying in the second helicopter. He and Luke had split up to each take command of a small squad of SAS operators. This was an American show, after all. "Yeah? What do you think?" "We got 3 choppers, man. These birds are loaded with Hellfire missiles and M60 machine guns. I say we come in and wreck the place. I doubt it's changed all that much. Go with Swan's priorities. Knock out the vehicles, then the stationary cannons. After that, if anybody still has fight left in them, we drop in and take them out too. Shoot first, ask questions later.
Luke nodded. It made sense.
Okay, sounds good.
But let's spare a couple so we can ask questions later.
A few moments passed. Luke looked at the young SAS men on his chopper.
Guys, he shouted, America thanks you for your service on our behalf. We know you men are the best of the best. The mission today is smash and grab. We want to bag one or two of the leaders of this militia. If the foot soldiers lay down, that's fine. We let them live. If they want to fight, we give them a fight. No one stops us, no one challenges us. But we want the leaders alive and intact.
What you gonna do with them, Yank?
Luke shrugged. We're gonna talk to them. Firmly. The young guys laughed at that. Incoming! The pilot shouted. Prepare for evasive action! Incoming? That was quick. Uh-oh, Luke said. The game's starting. The men took seats and strapped themselves in as the chopper banked hard right and gained altitude. A few seconds later, a rocket whooshed by. Then the heavy guns opened up. Luke could hear it, though he couldn't yet see it. The metallic clank of automatic cannon fire coming from the ground up ahead. Da-da-da-da-da! Stone, Ed said in his ear. How do they know we're coming? I don't know. I didn't tell them. Luke went up and poked his head into the cockpit. What are you guys seeing up here? Ahead and to the right, one of the pilots said. Vehicles moving across open desert. Mostly fast-moving pickups. Maybe modified SUVs. Heavy weaponry and truck beds. Ahead and to the left, the same. I count at least a dozen vehicles. I see at least one lorry or heavy truck, maybe a mobile rocket launcher. They've dispersed to make it harder on us. But they're coming out to fight. Kill them, Luke said. Fire when ready. Take the rocket launcher first. Tell the other choppers. The helicopters raced across the desert, 4 stories up. Luke poked his head out the bay door to the right. Ahead, to their right, trucks moved across open terrain. Luke could hear the rattle of their guns. He looked at the folded-up door gun, an M134 minigun. It had 6 rotating barrels powered by an electric motor, and it had a high rate of fire. Usually thousands of rounds per minute without cooking off. He had barely glanced at it before. He wasn't expecting to need it. A long belt of 7.62mm rounds hung from it. He looked at the nearest SAS guy. The tag sewn into the man's jumpsuit said, Gilmore. You, Gilmore, you know how to work that gun? The guy looked at it. He looked back at Luke. Naturally. Get to it. You're my door gunner. We're in a fight. Let's go. Rip it up. The guy unclipped and went to the gun. Luke went to the other side. A pickup truck was running straight at them, broadside to the chopper, the cargo door wide open. A man was in the truck bed, working the heavy gun. Watch it! Incoming fire! Gunfire erupted all around them, like a swarm of angry wasps. Luke dove to the floor. Something cut a sharp path across his right shoulder. There was a slice, then stinging pain. Metal shredded. Glass shattered somewhere. Luke crawled across the floor. He was hit in the shoulder. He could barely get a look at it. He looked at the 3 SAS guys who were still clipped in. How's it look? One of them shrugged. Flesh wound, Yank. The sudden roar of the minigun was earth-shattering, just above Luke's head. He slid away, ears ringing instantly. The SAS guy, Gilmore, rode the recoil, arms bouncing, his face a blank inside his face mask. A burst of fire came from the barrel. Luke watched out the cargo door. Gilmore was dialed in. The pickup had passed beneath the chopper. A line of bullets strafed the back of it. The man on the truck's heavy gun did a death dance and came apart like a straw doll. The back tires exploded, and the welded metal over the back windshield punched in. The pickup rolled to a stop. Nice shooting, Gilmore. Gilmore raised a hand in reply. Suddenly another burst of machine gun fire hit the chopper. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. Thunk, thunk, thunk. Gilmore's body jerked, and he fell away from the gun. More glass shattered up front. Luke hit the floor again. Gilmore was with him, screaming. Luke crawled to him. The rest of the SAS were already unclipping. Medic!
Luke shouted. "Medic!" Instantly, the medic was there. Gilmore's teeth were gritted in pain. His eyes were wild and mad. His breathing was fast. "I got hit," he said. "I got hit. Damn it to hell, man." "Where is it?" "I don't know. Everywhere." The medic cut open Gilmore's jumpsuit. He felt beneath Gilmore's body armor. Gilmore screamed in pain. "We've got to get this shit off him," the medic said. Luke looked at the two remaining SAS guys. He pointed at one of them. "You, next man up, on the gun. Don't get shot." Another burst of gunfire hit the chopper. More bullets ripped up metal. "Stone," the pilot yelled over the intercom. "We've got instruments down. We can't keep taking hits like this. We're going to lose this bird." "Take evasive action," Luke shouted. The chopper pulled up abruptly. It made a steep climb and banked hard to the left. The medic nearly fell over sideways. Luke clung to the floor, his fingers gripping metal slats. Another burst of gunfire came. An alarm in the cockpit began to sound. "Beep, beep, beep." The pilot's disembodied voice said, "Too late. We've got Mayday. A rotor's been hit. It's wobbling. It's not going to hold. We either land or we crash, but we're going down. How much time do we have?" None." Gilmore was screaming. "It's all right," the medic said. "You're hit, but it's all right." The guy with him yanked away Gilmore's armor. There was blood everywhere. Something had been cut to ribbons. "Aw, Jesus," the medic said. The chopper began to spin crazily. The pilot was trying to regain control. The chopper spun hard left, then spun all the way back again hard right. The desert was coming toward them with frightening speed. The chopper was spinning, but seemingly under the pilot's control. "My rudder's going. It's shuddering. I'm about to lose it." Everything seemed like a bad dream. The chopper moved horizontally at fantastic speed, maybe 50 feet above the ground. "Stone," Ed Newsom said in Luke's ear. "You guys are hit." Luke shook his head. "I know that." "Put it down," one of the pilots shouted. "Just put it down." It dropped with a sickening lurch, 3 stories in 1 second. The pilot's voice was resigned. "Mayday! Mayday! Assume crash positions." Luke stared up at the safety straps dangling. There was no way any of them could get there and tie themselves down in time. He reached down and hugged the floor as hard as he could. His fingers gripped metal slats. This was his crash position. The world zoomed by with dizzying speed. They were 20 feet from the ground. The pilot's voice. "Prepare for impact." "Be cool," Ed's deep voice said. "It looks okay." A burst of gunfire hit the tail of the chopper. Thunk, 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 thunk. Bullets ripped up metal. They were closer to land now, much closer. The chopper dropped out of the sky. It fell like a brick. Smack! The impact was hard, the jolt going up Luke's spine and through his body. His face bounced off the floor. Everything stopped. Another burst of gunfire strafed the chopper somewhere. That wasn't too bad. "He's dead," the medic said, shaking his head. "Damn it." The fight had turned. The militia had started with the element of surprise and all the initiative. But in wide-open desert, they were no match for the overwhelming firepower of the 2 remaining Blackhawks. Big Ed Newsom was the door gunner for his chopper, standing there like a mountain, tearing up the pickup trucks and jeeps. Luke and the SAS men bounced out of the downed chopper. They ran from one ruined smoking vehicle to the next, killing whatever opposition they encountered. Most of the militiamen on foot were running away across the desert to the north and west. They wouldn't get far. The metallic rattle of the big guns from the choppers came from over there. Da-da-da-da! Luke's little squad was walking now, guns out. The cluster of tents was just up ahead, flaps billowing in the desert wind. A tall man in flowing brown robes and a head wrap stood at the doorway of the largest tent. "Don't kill him," Luke said. "We need him." The man's beard was dark, with streaks of gray in it. His eyes were piercing. He seemed angry, confident, and not at all afraid. He said something in Arabic. One of the SAS guys turned his rifle around and butted the man in the face. Instantly, the man fell to the ground. His hand went to his jaw. The angry look on the man's face only became angrier. The SAS men looked down at him. "That's for Gilmore," he said.